Welcome to the opening line report here on Vegas Insider for Week 18. Kevin Rogers with you, and we'll be joined by Patrick Everson coming up in just a moment. Obviously, what happened last night between the Bills and the Bengals, the Damar Hamlin situation, we all hope for the best. That's what we've all, seen since that situation last night in which he collapsed on the field, and the medical team did a great job of resuscitating him after he had gone through a cardiac arrest. Very scary moment for everyone involved. And the NFL did make the right move by not continuing the game. There was no reason to continue the game in that circumstance. And obviously, Hamlin still in the hospital there in Cincinnati, and trying to find a way to make this a positive situation. That's what it is with him, that we only have very few answers in this whole thing. But also, with that being said, there are other things from our standpoint and what we do as far as giving you the information you need to see how this impacts everyone. And it's not a situation that we don't show any humanity or that we don't show sensitivity, but we also just want to know on the other side, all right, we want Damar Hamlin to be better, but also we want to know what else is going on. So we're going to discuss all of that right now with Patrick Everson, who is joining us here. And Patrick, Happy New Year. It's good to see you. Obviously, before this game last night, we had a different mindset coming into today, but it is what we're dealing with. But this is the first thing I want to get to with you, Patrick. We know that different casinos have different house rules. Just from the standpoint of this game being postponed in the first quarter, is a long way to go. No one can say, all right, well, the Bengals were up 2 touchdowns and they should have won. Like, the game, there's a long way to go. So you don't really have a winner in this game. But how are the casinos, how are the sports books handling this situation with the game being postponed and we have no idea if it's being made up or not?
Okay. And again, all your points in the intro there, right on point, is the best way I can put it there, Kevin. And obviously this is a very unique situation and a very fluid situation. I think from the top, we should note that really at this point, everybody's waiting on the NFL to provide that clarity. And I think we should understand that with all the dominoes that are impacted here, it may take a little time to get that clarity. So some patience is going to be required of everybody, no matter where you fall, what you're interested in, what your stake is in this situation. Some patience is going to be required until the NFL has had enough time to figure out the situation and provide clarity to everybody, including the sportsbook operators. So now that said, at least here in Nevada, and I assume it's a similar setup in other states, each sportsbook operator has a set of house rules, as you alluded to. Those house rules go through gaming control and are approved by gaming control. And they don't have to be the same at every book. They just have to be done in a way that the gaming control board deems is acceptable and approvable. And then whatever is accepted and approved, that's how the sports books have to apply those rules in any situation, for a cancellation, a postponement, a suspension, etc. They have to abide by the house rules that they submitted to gaming control and the gaming control subsequently approved. So again, it's not the same for every book. So what we have is a situation here, and I'm not going to single out any particular book, but what I will say is there are some books in situations where, not specific to this situation, but just where a game is postponed, suspended, potentially canceled. There are some books in the former two, postponement, suspension, with the idea that perhaps the game will resume or will just be completely replayed at some point. There are some operators who have a house rule of, as long as the game is played within a certain period of days, usually within a week, maybe 8 days. 8 days seems to be the long end of that. It seems to be the tipping point. If it's played within 8 days, then all bets are still action. That is the house rule at certain books. at other books, if it's not played on the day that it was scheduled, and or if it's canceled, obviously, but if it's not played on the day it's scheduled, even if it's rescheduled at some point down the road, then it's a refund of all bets involved with that game, and that's that. Now, both those sets of rules have been approved by the Gaming Control Board. So in some cases, some people may have already seen refunds based on what happened last night. Others, you'll have to wait until there's more clarity about what the league is going to do, but your bet may end up still being live action. It may well be if this game is played within 8 days. And again, that's just the sportsbook operators operating within the house rules that they are required to abide by after having those rules approved by the Gaming Control Board. And I've talked with a couple of different odds makers about this over the last 12 to 14 hours. And really the best comment I got, and I'm just odds maker. I'm not naming names or naming books, but this person said it's unprecedented. We're just trying to follow the rules. So that's where they're at on this. And I know that probably doesn't provide all the clarity that everybody wants, but hopefully it lets people know kind of how this works. There are guidelines in place for any event, regardless of how or why that event is suspended, postponed, potentially canceled, that these operators have to follow. Those are submitted, approved, and then therefore must be enacted in the same way via which they were approved. So that's where we're at this point. I would say, obviously, if it's canceled, if this game is not played, I think everybody can rest fairly assured that all bets will be a refund.
Well, there's a couple things too to point out as well, Patrick. When you go back to the COVID season of 2020, amazingly, the NFL played every game. And yes, there were games that were moved. They didn't get started. We had that Steelers-Ravens game that went from like Tuesday to Wednesday, but the game still got finished. So every game got played that season. We have never seen, Patrick, a game be stopped and suspended and then postponed. This is the tough part of our job here, Patrick, is that if, let's just say, Indianapolis was playing Chicago last night, it's easy to be like, move on, doesn't matter, who cares? The biggest issue with this is that these two teams are playing for the number one seed in the AFC, along with Kansas City. And obviously, if these teams don't make the game up or don't finish the game, then you have Kansas City playing 17 games, Buffalo and Cincinnati playing 16 games, and tiebreakers are wonky and home field. But also, this isn't baseball or basketball where you say, okay, Buffalo and Cincinnati can play the game Friday and then play again on Sunday, another opponent. Like, you can't do it. So how does the NFL, and I'm asking you a loaded question, but how does the NFL make this up? I can't imagine they make this game up. There's not enough time.
That's the issue. Exactly. And it's been well pointed out by a lot of people on social media. There's a lot of people on social media who are being very reasonable about this, by the way. And on both sides, I certainly understand both sides of the argument on the sports betting side, how that's resolved. The NFL resolution, to your point, Kevin, it is so tricky. I did see one suggestion that was interesting, and I almost think there's another way to take it. But what the suggestion was, and this is just a random person on Twitter, actually not so random. It might have, I think it's a guy I actually kind of know, but but what he said was, the AFC loses the bye week before the Super Bowl. And because remember, it's not just Kansas City, Cincinnati, and Buffalo impacted here. The Ravens are in the hunt for the AFC North title still, and until and if Cincinnati were to beat Buffalo, that would still be up for grabs. So there are other dominoes that could move pieces around as we look at the playoffs. So the suggestion was the AFC loses the bye week, and ostensibly what happens there is the AFC doesn't play this week, and the NFC does. And the AFC plays week 16 on what would have been the first week of the playoffs, or week 17. I'm sorry, week 18. I'm sorry. I'm getting all confused here. The AFC plays its final regular season game on what would have been the first weekend of the playoffs, while the NFC begins its playoffs. And then basically what happens there is the AFC side, everybody gets the games played and so forth, but the AFC just doesn't get the extra week going into the Super Bowl. And I thought, well, that's kind of, I'm not saying that the NFL would do this. I'm not saying it's practical. I haven't even really thought about all the logistics involved with that and the fairness and all that. I haven't thought about that. I just thought it was an interesting point brought up on Twitter, but I did think about it a little further, and I thought, okay, why not? If you're going to, if that is something that's being entertained, and I'm not saying it is, I have no idea. I can't, I don't know. I mean, like you said, this is totally unprecedented. We have no idea what the league is thinking, how they're going to manage the situation, etc. But why not instead just play week 18 in 2 weeks, not this weekend, but the following weekend, the weekend that was supposed to be super wild card weekend. And then everybody gets the same amount of, everybody's on a level playing field going to the Super Bowl. The Super Bowl stays on the same day. The playoffs just get backed up a week, and there's no bye week between the conference championship games and the Super Bowl. I mean, short of that, I'm not quite sure how you're going to come to a fair situation for all the teams that this impacts. And again, everybody who tunes in now or who watches this back later, please understand Kevin and I are trying to be really, really sensitive to the situation as a whole here. There's a human being involved, and we totally understand that. We're just addressing how the NFL has to process this to figure out how to go forward and keep this all intact over the next 5 or 6 weeks heading up to the Super Bowl. Obviously it's a touchy situation, and we're trying to be sensitive to it. I'm just doing a little bit of speculating on how, if you're going to get everybody to 17 games on a level playing field, accurately determining who should be where when it comes to the postseason and how the postseason should unfold, maybe this is something that can be done.
I would have thought that they would have stopped the game last night, which was right. And then Buffalo was going to stay in Cincinnati. Obviously, they left town and they went back home. That they would have maybe tried to play the game today or tonight, and then who knows what. I mean, I would have thought the perfect situation would have been, and again, assuming DeMar Hamlin's okay and all this stuff.
Yes.
And everything. They play the game today. They finish the game today, and they back up the Bills, Patriots, and Ravens-Bengals to Monday. Give them an extra day to do that, so they're not flipping back around. I thought that could have been a possibility, but obviously that's not going to happen. I wanted your opinion on this too, Patrick. You brought this up to me. We talked before the show. What does this mean for win totals, for other kind of props, for anything that you have? How do the books deal with this and saying, okay, now you're playing 16 games potentially, assuming they'll make this game up, 16 games instead of 17 games. How do they do that with win totals, with other things like that? Obviously, the Bills have wrapped up the AFC East. The Bengals have not won their division yet. So how do they handle all of this?
Yeah, exactly. It's going to be very tricky. And that's, more of the calculus that's going on behind the counter right now as the odds makers wait. It's like I said, as that odds maker told me this morning, it's unprecedented. We're just trying to follow the rules, but this is so unprecedented. And it's not just from a week to week basis and how many regular season games are played and playoff position, or even the specific, what happens with last night's activity. To your point, you've got, futures bets on division winners. And while some operators take those kind of bets off the board once the season starts, it's a preseason bet, and that's what it is. Others continue to keep it up all season long and just keep adjusting the prices based on how the season is unfolding. So you could, those are still markets that can be bet into, and they're based on whether it's winning the division or the over-under on win totals, et cetera, is based on getting in a full season. So now again, this is just speculation. This is guessing on my part. But if either of these teams, if both of these teams, honestly, don't play a 17th game, and that fact causes, impacts the number on any of those bets, I would guess they would have to be refunds. Unless they've already hit certain benchmarks, that would make them a winner, or potentially in a situation where the bet is absolutely a loser no matter what. But I don't think that's the case with these two teams because they're both so good. And then you're also talking about, look, I don't think Josh Allen's in the MVP race he's in the race, but there's some definition there where we'd have to have a couple of substantially good games. Now, the opportunity was there to do it because last night was a really key game, with Burrow against Allen, and both of those two are right there. Although Mahomes has really put some distance between himself and those two in this market. And Jalen Hurts maybe is still there as well. But there's such a domino effect here that it's hard to say exactly how they go, but it will impact a whole lot of other discussions if there's not a 17th game played if these two teams don't reach 17 games. And like I said, I think anything where if they don't play a 17th game where your ticket is directly impacted by them not playing it, like your ticket could have been a winner, could have been a loser, but could have been a winner with 17 games. I think more than likely the ruling in that instance would be a situation where it would be a refund.
I'm going to ask you something. I'm not sure if you have the answer to it, but I'll just ask it anyway. With the contests out in Vegas, Superbook and Circa, obviously not the survivor pool because no one had Bills-Bengals last night. But in those, I guess it's kind of like a push in a sense because the game doesn't get played. You're only getting 4 games instead of 5. How would that work out if, let's just say, you were almost in first place, you needed one of these teams to win, and you lose? Again, if you lose the game, you lose the game, but you had the potential to win the game. What would happen with that? That if you have, in the end, 84 games instead of 85 games, I guess it's kind of like, well, too bad, right?
Boy, and that's something, like you said, fortunately with the Survivor contest, I think you noted, I hadn't checked, but nobody had the Bills or the Bengals in that. Is that if that's correct, then good. I mean, we're only down to 3. We're down to 3 entries. Yeah. So, and chances are you would have used both of those teams earlier than now, just to make sure you are still in the contest. But boy, does that get tricky with like the Super Contest and the Circa Millions contest and so forth. If you decided to go with either of those teams last night, I haven't asked that question yet, but it's something I'll probably wait to ask some of these questions until the NFL provides the clarity that everybody's seeking on this. And but it's a question that it's a good question. It's a fair question. It needs to be asked, and hopefully we'll get an answer. But how tricky is that, Kevin? I don't know. I mean, if you suddenly get a game less and you're right there, how do you make that up? I mean, somebody's going to be advantaged by it, and somebody's going to be disadvantaged by it. It's just such an unprecedented situation.
And by the way, I just did look it up that 2 of the contestants had the Giants, 1 had the Lions. So in the Cirque, I wouldn't think somebody would have taken that game last night, but obviously it didn't matter. All right, Patrick, we've gone nearly 20 minutes on this, which is fine. Let's talk about some of the games for Week 18. Let's take a look at some of the other games. Now, you have the AFC South Championship coming up Saturday night in Jacksonville. Jags almost a touchdown favorite here. I mean, Tennessee, you talk about free-falling and what they have done so far this season. Great first half, even though they started 0-2. They had things going. They have not won in weeks. Jacksonville has made up all these games. They had a blowout of Houston last week. Now Jacksonville's nearly a touchdown favorite, and the Jags can wrap up the AFC South title Saturday night at home. What are you hearing with this game, the line movement?
Right. So Sunday evening, per usual, I reach out to the folks at the Superbook for their opening lines and kind of how things are trending early on. And this game actually opened Jags 6 and got to 7 on Sunday night. By later Sunday evening, they'd gotten to Jags 7, so up a whole point. And what Neil Fitzroy, risk manager and odds maker behind the counter at the Superbook, told me at that point, he said there was definitely some money showing on the Jags at -6. I think since then it is backed up a half a point to 6.5. Double checking right now. So just give me a moment on this. Okay. Or maybe more than a moment as I scroll for. There it is. Yes, it has backed up to 6.5. But yeah, it's a really interesting game because the Titans were rolling until they got to that Cincinnati game, and the Cincinnati game was competitive. It was a good game. And they haven't won since. It's really the drop off has been staggering. And obviously the last couple of weeks, it's in no small part due to the situation at quarterback. And Derrick Henry's a little banged up too, but this is just, it's wild to think that Jacksonville, which I believe had the worst record in the league last year, or one of the worst records in the league last year, is controlling its own destiny at this point. And not only controlling its own destiny, but is practically laying a touchdown, to your point.
Yeah, it really is crazy how, again, Tennessee was just rolling. That AFC South was done. And Jacksonville, all right, maybe next year Trevor Lawrence, but they won some of these games. They came back and beat Dallas. They destroyed Tennessee on the road when they first played them. And now Tennessee, they've gone for Tannehill, who's hurt. Malik Willis wasn't the answer. Now Joshua Dobbs making a second start. Vrabel's is out of guys, and Derrick Henry's beat up. So this will be interesting coming up on Saturday night. The Sunday night game, Lions and the Packers from Lambeau. And look, Green Bay has made a nice comeback as well. Detroit was in a big hole too. But Green Bay's made a great comeback to now, have a shot at the playoffs. Detroit is there as well. We'll see what happens with Seattle. They play earlier in the day against the Rams. But this line's sitting at BetMGM right now at 4.5, total of 48.5. It was a low-scoring game the first time. Detroit beat them at home, but now we'll see how it goes this time around. What have you what do you have in this game, Patrick?
Well, and again, another obviously a really interesting one. The Packers were having a miserable season and now control their own destiny. If they win, they're in. The Lions need to win and have the Seahawks lose to the Rams to get to the playoffs. And what Neil Fitzroy, again behind the counter at the Superbook, said at the time, this was Sunday night, and the NFL has, didn't really firm up its schedule until yesterday. They wanted to see how all these games turned out and figure out where they want to place games, the Saturday game, the Sunday night game, all the Sunday day games, what time everything was going to be at. So Neil is speaking prior to those decisions being made. And he said with that situation existing, both teams needing to win, he said we should get an all-out effort from both teams. We could see good two-way action on this game. I don't disagree with that, but I know that Neil was speaking at the time under the opinion, at least, that these games, that the Packers and Lions would play probably at the same time, probably obviously in the afternoon slot, the later slot, as the Seahawks and the Rams. Well, now this game is Sunday night. If Seattle wins, Detroit's got nothing to play for. So it's a really interesting one to consider for bettors, because especially before you know the result of that Rams-Seahawks game, because Detroit's situation could already be cemented. They could be out. Now it gets a whole lot more interesting, obviously, if the Rams beat Seattle. And then the Sunday night game is for all the marbles for both teams. Whoever wins advances. So it's a tricky spot. I'm kind of surprised that that's the one they moved into the Sunday night game under those circumstances. But it is what it is. Neil thinks there'll be good two-way action. I won't argue with that necessarily. I just think that was more likely under a scenario in which the Lions-Packers game takes place at the same time as the Rams-Seahawks game. Now, that said, looking up to the minute as we're all talking on, late Tuesday morning Pacific time, early Tuesday afternoon Eastern time, I'm looking at VSiN, or rather at DraftKings splits, and on the game basically to the minute. Now, look, as I've noted to you before, as we've done this show, it's very early in the week. There's not a whole lot in the pot on any of these games. But of what's in the pot, the ticket count is pretty close to even on the Lions-Packers game, a slight edge to the Packers. Money, a little bit more of an edge to the Packers. 62% of early money on the spread is going to Green Bay. And at the Superbook, they opened this game 4.5. I believe they are still sitting 4.5. Let me see if they are still sitting 4.5 now. So probably not a whole lot of activity to it. Superbook still at 4.5, DraftKings at 4.5, and the money and the ticket's pretty close to DraftKings. The money, a lean, but not a heavy lean to the Packers.
Should put Titans Jags on Sunday night. And I understand
Exactly.
that it's not sexy, but it's still for the division title and nothing else impacts it. Where
Exactly.
if you played Lions Packers Saturday, at least it still means something for both teams. And then Seattle, depends on what they do Sunday, but we can't make it perfect where everyone's playing at the same time. Like we just like it.
Right. Understood that. That's true.
But also, too, the other thing with that Titans-Jags game, Patrick, is Tennessee played Thursday against Dallas. Jacksonville played Sunday. Now, Jacksonville gets to have the short week. And Tennessee's got, Tennessee, it's not equal. I mean, it was never going to be equal because Tennessee had a few days off. But Jacksonville has a short week on this. Like, that didn't make a lot of sense. The NFL, I didn't really get that one. All right, this other game in the AFC, the Jets and Dolphins. Jets are out of it. Dolphins need to win, plus have a New England loss to Buffalo. But Dolphins could be down to Skylar Thompson as their starting quarterback. Tua, obviously, still dealing with the concussion stuff, and Teddy Bridgewater suffered a finger injury in the loss to New England. And now Skylar Thompson, who played most of that Jets game the first time around. Dolphins a short favorite here. I mean, this is a crazy game just because both teams have struggled down the stretch. Obviously, Jets have nothing to play for, but they want to end the season, I'm sure, with a win over their rivals. The Dolphins need a win and help to get in. So what have you heard with this line movement on this game?
Well, it's been pretty quick, significant movement toward the Jets. The Superbook late Sunday afternoon, early Sunday evening opened Dolphins 3.5 in this game, but that's before they had, a lot more information than what we have on Tuesday, Tuesday afternoon Eastern time, early Tuesday afternoon. So this game at the Superbook, and I presume elsewhere, is down to a pick 'em. And, at the time on Sunday night, as I talked to Neil Fitzroy about this at the Superbook, he said, look, there's just not much to report here. Miami had moved a little bit Sunday night. They went from 3.5 to 3, but now this game's all the way down to pick because of all the issues that you just listed there. And I assume the total's probably fallen. Yeah, the total's fallen precipitously. It's down to 38.5, and it opened at 41.5. So down 3 points already on the total in that game. But with a little bit more of a current snapshot of this game at DraftKings, they're showing about 2-to-1 tickets on Miami on the spread in the early going this week, and 53% of money on Miami. So a very modest lean toward Miami on this game. It's pretty tricky, and it's another game. It's almost like you noted with the Titans. I mean, a month ago, 5 weeks ago, Miami was the talk of the league with an MVP candidate at quarterback, and now, just like the Titans, they are swimming against the tide, trying to get into the playoffs here, and may ultimately end up not making it. And when you think about, I felt like that Dolphins-Bills game a couple of weeks back was a phenomenal game. It's like, okay, Miami is a quality team and could be a very difficult out in the postseason. And now we're at a point where they might not even make the postseason. It's an unfortunate situation down there with Bridgewater and so forth, or rather with Tua Tagovailoa and so forth.
This other game I want to hit on with you, Patrick, the Giants-Eagles game. So what's so funny about this, we haven't had a lot of things that we could be funny about today, but the Giants have nothing to play for and the Eagles do, which you didn't think would be the case because the Giants wrapped up a playoff berth this past week, and Philadelphia they went from being the number one overall seed, no doubt about it, to not winning the NFC East potentially if they lose and the Cowboys win at Washington. So Philadelphia is a 14-point favorite. We'll see if Jalen Hurts plays this week. He's missed the last few weeks with that shoulder injury, but Philadelphia now kind of in a must-win spot in this game.
Yeah, it is really wild to think that Philadelphia, which was 12-1, 13-1, etc., shoe-in for the number one seed, and now could actually lose the division. Obviously, the odds makers think that's highly unlikely with that number up to 14. And this actually out of the gate at Superbook. Now, it moved very quickly, but out of the gate at Superbook, it was the Eagles 11.5, and then shot up to 14 in pretty short order on Sunday night, and it's still at 14 right now. And to your point, the game means nothing to the Giants. They have clinched a wild card, and they will be the 6th seed in the NFC. And that's that. So the Eagles have everything to gain here, and the Giants don't have anything to gain. And I would say it would be pretty difficult for the Eagles to lose this game because the Giants need to sit their start. They don't, if they're locked into the 6th seed, who they're going to play is who they're going to play, regardless of how the rest of the seeding falls out. They should be resting their starters. So Neil fully expects that everybody's going to be in on the Eagles, and I'm sure they are. and that the book is going to need the Giants. Now, again, looking at a more current snapshot today, the kind of the latest splits on this game. This is interesting at DraftKings right now. I'm going to refresh this just to make sure this is right, because this is not what I expected to see even early. Although it is a big number. I mean, it's a huge number. And if Jalen Hurts doesn't play, then, and maybe that's the thought here is, Philly probably would love to have Jalen Hurts get one more week of rest, and and feel perfectly capable of beating a Giants team that really should be resting everybody. They feel capable of beating them with Gardner Minshew at quarterback. Ticket count 5-1 plus and money 2-1 on the Giants at plus 14 at DraftKings.
Now, before we wrap up, Patrick, let's move on to the national championship Monday.
Sure.
So you have TCU and Georgia playing in LA, and two crazy games on Saturday. Ohio State blew that game to Georgia, so the Bulldogs back in the national championship. TCU, who no one in their right mind thought when the season began they'd be in the conversation to win the championship, much less be in the college football playoff, much less to win the Big 12. They didn't win the Big 12, but they still ended up in the top 4, and now they play Georgia. Georgia nearly a 2-touchdown favorite here. After we saw the high-scoring game, I guess two-parter for you, Patrick. After we saw the high-scoring games on Saturday, are people going to want to keep banging that over? And also, Georgia opened up, at 14? Now it's down to 13. What are you hearing with the line movement in this game?
Right. So it's interesting. Well, let's address the total first. This literally, as the games ended, I was going back and forth with John Murray, executive director at the Superbook, and they went up pretty quickly with Georgia 13.5 and an over under of 64. And John said we might have been prisoners of the moment with that opening total. 2 high-scoring games in the semifinals. And he said we got crushed on the over in both games, but he said especially so in the Ohio State-Georgia game. So the bettors just had a heyday with that game going over easily. So he said we might have been prisoners of the moment going 64. Others came out, not long after, 5 minutes, maybe 10 minutes at a lower number. And the Superbook dropped pretty quickly down to 61.5. It's stabilized at 62.5 over the last couple of days, Sunday, Monday. Looks like it's up a tick to 63 today. But I don't, the public always remembers what they saw last, and what they saw last were 2 just wildly entertaining games. So I would guess the books are going to need the under here, and potentially in a pretty big way. The spread, the Superbook opened 13.5, and that seemed to be the right number. They, at least out of the gate, they stuck there Saturday night, Sunday, yesterday. Looks like they're down to 13 today. So a slight move toward the dog here. But what John said about this is how he feels like it's going to unfold. And I think it makes sense. He said, I think what you're going to end up seeing is the public backing the dog. People don't want to lay 13 points. They don't want to lay minus 500 on the money line. He said TCU money line will be very popular. No doubt about that. And what I've heard from a couple of odds makers, John included, but also from, I've also heard this from the folks at BetMGM, Seamus McGee and Jason Scott, that, this is the point. Well, really, it's all along you're looking at this and you're managing this, but this is the point where the futures book totally winds down. It's the championship game. Georgia has for many weeks at BetMGM, probably a couple, 3 months, maybe most of the season. Georgia has been a very good outcome in the futures market to win a second straight national championship. They would definitely do better to Georgia than TCU at BetMGM. The Superbook ended and stated likewise, and I'd assume that would be the case because you probably got some tickets out there that they may not have been huge bets on TCU, but they could have potentially been at very, very, at significantly long numbers, whereas Georgia was always a very, very short number all season long. So I would guess most books will want Georgia in the futures market. And based on the fact that it's probably going to be bet the way John described, people don't want to lay 13 points. People don't want to lay minus 500 on the money line, that they'll probably need Georgia just for the game itself as well.
Yeah, TCU's been a fantastic underdog this year in their few spots. They've won these games outright. They're not just covering them; they're winning them outright. They did it against Texas, against Oklahoma way back when we didn't think anything of TCU, and then of course against Michigan this past week, a game they pretty much led all the way through.
Right.
And Georgia did struggle with Ohio State. TCU can score, but also Georgia's just an elite team. So I mean, this number, I feel like. I've gone back and forth with myself on this too, Patrick, thinking, wow, like how do you not take the points with TCU? But then I'm like, wow, Georgia's laying this amount of points. and they're a machine. They could light it up anytime, and their defense can step up and slow down Max Duggan and that fantastic TCU offense. So, yeah, and the under could be a look too, because you're, again, prisoner of the moment. You're thinking about what happened last week, all the points that were scored, and TCU had a couple pick sixes. Things worked out. That third down the sidelines, that big plays that TCU really cashed in on.
Right. No, it's a great point. And honestly, I'll tell you what I did with that, with the Georgia game, and maybe what you might want to consider with the national championship game is, look, in-game betting is honestly, in-game betting, A, is a lot of fun, and B, can represent opportunities for value that you can't get pregame. So, I mean, if you like Georgia, but you're reticent to lay all those points, and certainly reticent to lay the heavy juice on the money line, sit tight for 5 minutes or 10 minutes of the game. See if TCU, which has been magical all season long, maybe they get the opening kick and go down and get a touchdown. And then in game, you get a more valuable number on Georgia that you feel that you're more comfortable stomaching. I found in game is a good way around that. I took Georgia money line plus, I think it was like plus 175 or something when Ohio State got out to that big lead. And that, I mean, I got lucky as hell. Look, it was a very lucky one to cash, as we all saw by how that game ended. But it was certainly a much more attractive number than you could have gotten pregame. And like I said, if you want to be involved in the game on a side, and you feel like it's too many points, but you also feel like TCU's overmatched here, maybe sit tight for a little bit and see if a better number rolls in for you.
We shall see. The college football bowl season has been definitely fun down the stretch, seeing the TC or the Tulane USC game.
Oh, gosh.
On Monday, that crazy game, the Mississippi State Illinois game, and how that one, and another crazy point spread finish on that one too.
That's a bad beat, man, for sure.
I read something that Mississippi State didn't lead the entire game until 7 seconds left. They won by 9. How did these things happen? But then again, we've seen these lateral things that have been absolutely crazy. But college football coming to a close Monday in LA with that TCU-Georgia game. Obviously, hopefully get everything figured out in the next day or so with the NFL and what they'll do with the Bills-Bengals, which I don't think will be played again, but how they're going to handle everything. Patrick, thank you so much. Where can people find your work? We know on Vegas Insider, but you have the NFL Week 18 odds report. It'll be updated, I'm sure, after we find out these matchups, and also for the national championship on Monday.
Yes, that obviously the article's up on Vegas Insider right now, and as soon as we get a little bit more clarity on how the rest of on how Week 18, I'm not even going to say the rest, but how Week 18 is going to be handled, I'll obviously have some updates in there that get people up to speed on that. The college football playoff odds and action report is up. It's been updated through Monday. It'll update several more times throughout the week and throughout the day on Monday, heading up to kickoff. But and I would also say, look, Kevin, you and everybody else at Vegas Insider, Michael Crossan and others, a host of people are doing a ton of good content at Vegas Insider this week on NFL, on the college football playoff championship game, and on everything else. College basketball is really starting to warm up now, and and NBA is always there. There's just a ton of great content from a lot of people who are, to be blunt, working their asses off. So a lot of really good content there. I encourage you, get over to Vegas Insider, check out our YouTube channel. Follow Vegas Insider on Twitter. All that information gets out there as well. So a lot of ways you can engage with my content, but really with Kevin, with yours and everybody else's content there. There's a lot of great stuff that can really help you go to the counter and make a more informed wager, which is really all we're trying to do, right?
Yeah, and the last week of the regular season, and coming up next week, we'll look at the playoffs and what we have for that. Another update on the national championship for Monday. So we're looking forward to that, assuming everything kind of stays the same for Week 18. But you can find Patrick on Twitter at @PatrickE_Vegas. Patrick, as always, great work. We appreciate it, and we'll talk to you again next week for the playoffs.
Sounds good. Have a great week, Kevin.
All right, you too. That is Patrick Everson. I am Kevin Rogers. Thanks a lot for tuning in, and as always, best of luck with